A millionaire comes home on Christmas Day to an empty home and a letter written by his wife. The content of the letter shocks him. James pulls up to the driveway of his magnificent mansion in his black Mercedes S-Class on Christmas morning. He gets out of the car and approaches the front porch with a bouquet of rose flowers, half expecting his wife to be at the door. As he opens the door, he is greeted by silence. He calls out to his wife at the top of his voice, "Michelle, are you home?" But he gets nothing but silence in return. His eyes scan the house and he sees a yellow note on the dining table. He pulls off his overcoat and hangs it on the coat rack by the door and then approaches the table. His eyes scan the note and is shocked by what is written on the note. The words hit him like a physical blow, his breath catching in his throat. He picked up the note, his hands trembling slightly. What do you think he saw? Like and subscribe below before we move on. The day before, Michelle sat curled in a plush armchair, her legs tucked beneath her. A glass of deep red wine rested in her hand, untouched, as her gaze darted repeatedly to the clock above the mantel. Each tick of the minute hand seemed to echo louder than the last, amplifying the emptiness around her. It was Christmas Eve. The house was beautifully decorated, as always. A towering pine tree sat at the corner of the sitting room, adorned with twinkling lights, delicate ornaments that glimmered like frost, and a star at the top, just as their kids loved it. But this year the joy felt hollow. The children were spending the holiday at their grandparents', a decision James had insisted on, though Mitchell had wanted them home. They deserved to be spoiled by their grandparents, he'd said with that charming smile of his. Now, she wondered if there had been another motive. She took a sip of wine, her throat tightening as the rich liquid slid down. The taste was bitter tonight, or maybe it was just her mood. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 7, its resonant toll marking the passage of another hour. Mitchell sat at the edge of their cream-colored sofa, her fingers nervously smoothing invisible wrinkles in her maroon sweater. The scent of cinnamon and pine filled the room from the candle she had lit earlier, but their comforting aroma did little to calm her growing unease. James walked in from the study, his tie slightly loosened and a familiar apologetic smile on his face. His dark hair was neatly combed back, though a few strands rebelliously fell across his forehead. In his tailored suit, he looked every bit the charismatic CEO who could command boardrooms and captivate audiences. But tonight, Mitchell saw something different in his eyes that made her stomach twist. "I'm sorry, Mitch," he began, his tone low and sincere as he slipped on his tailored overcoat. He rarely called her by her full name anymore, a small detail she had noticed over the years. "You know, we had planned to spend the evening together, but there's no way around it. End-of-year audits are a nightmare this time of year. The team needs me to sign off on some final reports." Michelle forced a small smile, her fingers tightening around the edge of the sofa. "It's okay. I understand," she said softly, though her voice lacked conviction. Her heart sank as she watched him pick up his briefcase, the gold monogram on its leather surface catching the soft glow of the Christmas tree lights. As he leaned down to kiss her goodbye, the sharp buzz of his phone pierced the moment. James quickly pulled it out, glancing at the screen. His brows furrowed, and he swiped the notification away almost too quickly. The glow of the phone reflected on his face for a second longer than it should have. "What was that?" Mitchell asked casually, trying to keep her tone light. "Just an alert about a meeting tomorrow," James replied smoothly, his voice unwavering. He placed a hand on her shoulder and looked her in the eyes, the corners of his mouth lifting into what she used to think of as his most disarming smile. "Don't wait up for me, okay? I might be late. I'll make it up to you tomorrow." She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Good luck with the audits." "Thanks," he said, brushing a kiss against her forehead. "Love you." The words felt hollow as the door clicked shut behind him. Have you ever felt like something wasn't quite right with a partner but couldn't prove it? What did you do? Share your thoughts in the comments section. Mitchell remained seated for a long moment, staring at the closed door as the echo of his footsteps faded. Her mind replayed the scene over and over, dissecting every detail. The hurried glance at his phone, the vague explanation, the way he avoided her eyes when he said he loved her. She stood and walked to the window, pulling back the heavy velvet curtain. Outside, the storm had picked up, snow swirling under the dim glow of the streetlights. James's black Mercedes-Benz pulled out of the driveway, the tires crunching over the freshly fallen snow. She watched until his taillights disappeared into the night. Returning to the sofa, she sank into its cushions, the weight of her thoughts pressing heavily on her chest. A dozen little moments from the past year surface, late nights at the office, unexplained trips, and that one time she found a receipt for a luxury spa she had never visited. When she'd asked him about it, he'd laughed it off, saying it was for a client's wife. At the time, she wanted so badly to believe him. Michelle leaned forward, her elbows resting on her knees as she clasped her hands together. Her thumb absently traced the edge of her wedding ring, a habit she developed over the years whenever she was deep in thought. A memory surfaced unbidden the day James proposed. They'd been hiking in the Blue Ridge Mountains, one of her favorite places. At the summit, as they overlooked a sea of rolling green hills, he had knelt on one knee and presented her with a ring that sparkled like the morning dew. "You're my compass, Michelle," he'd said. "You always bring me back to what matters." Where had that man gone? The tracking app on her phone caught her eye. They'd downloaded it years ago, a mutual decision for safety after a scare with their youngest son wandering off during a family vacation. It was meant to provide peace of mind, a way to ensure they always knew where each other was. Now, it felt like a lifeline to the truth. Her fingers hesitated over the screen. She felt a pang of guilt, as though checking his location would cross some invisible line of trust. But then, hadn't he crossed it first? She tapped the app icon and waited as the map loaded. A red dot appeared on the screen, blinking steadily. Her heart pounded as she zoomed in on the location. It wasn't his office. It wasn't anywhere near his office. It was a luxury restaurant an hour away, a place she recognized from an anniversary dinner years ago. Her breath caught in her throat as she stared at the map. The blinking red dot mocked her, confirming what she had feared but wasn't ready to face. She thought she was being paranoid, but when the app showed James wasn't at work, her fears turned into a burning need for answers. Mitchell's mind raced, a whirlwind of emotions threatening to consume her. Was he meeting a client? A friend? Or was it something far worse? The nagging doubts she'd suppressed for so long now roared to the surface, demanding action. She stood abruptly, pacing the room. Her slippers whispered against the hardwood floor as she tried to steady her breathing. For years, she'd been the supportive wife, the one who held the family together while James pursued his ambitions. She had trusted him implicitly, even when things didn't add up. But this felt like betrayal. Mitchell paused by the mantel, her eyes falling on a framed photo of the family from last Christmas. James stood in the center, his arms around her and the kids. They all looked so happy, so complete. The sight of it now felt like a cruel joke. She considered calling him, confronting him outright. But what if she was wrong? What if there was an innocent explanation, and yet, deep down, she already knew the truth? Mitchell sank back onto the sofa, her thoughts swirling like the snow outside. Her hands trembled as she picked up her wine glass and took a long sip, the liquid burning her throat. If she confronted him now, he'd have an excuse ready. He always did. No, she needed proof. Something undeniable. And the tracking app had just given her a starting point. If you found out your partner lied about where they were on Christmas Eve, would you confront them immediately or wait for more proof? The wind roared as Michelle gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white against the leather. Snowflakes lashed against the windshield, each flake illuminated by the pale glow of her headlights. The heater struggled to keep the chill at bay, and Michelle could feel the icy bite creeping through her coat, despite the warm air blasting from the vents. The storm outside mirrored the tempest inside her, wild, unrelenting, and impossible to ignore. But her mind raced with questions as the wipers fought to clear her view. What am I going to say when I see him? What excuse will he have this time? She had rehearsed a dozen confrontations in her head during the hour-long drive, but none of them felt right. Every imagined conversation ended with his calm, practiced explanations, the kind that had once charmed her but now left her feeling empty. The car hit a patch of ice, skidding slightly. Michelle's heart jumped into her throat as she corrected the steering, her breath quick and shallow. For a moment, the danger of the storm eclipsed her thoughts of James, but as she regained control, her mind returned to the blinking red dot on the tracking app. It was still there, pulsing like a heartbeat, right outside the high-scale restaurant she hadn't visited in years. The last time she and James had been there, it was their anniversary. She remembered the warmth of his hand over hers as they sipped wine, The way he had looked at her with such intensity that it had made her blush. He had always had a way of making her feel like the most important person in the room, until recently. Now, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone else had taken her place. Michelle tightened her grip on the wheel as she approached the restaurant. Its exterior was just as she remembered, elegant stone walls adorned with twinkling fairy lights and a grand, arching doorway framed by festive wreaths. The parking lot was full despite the storm, and the sight of it made her stomach twist. She found an empty spot near the back, cutting the engine and sitting in silence for a moment. The only sound was the wind howling around her car. She glanced at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her dark eyes, once vibrant and full of life, now looked weary and uncertain. She adjusted her scarf, tugging it higher to shield her face from the biting cold, and stepped out into the storm. Snow crunched under her boots as she crossed the lot, her breath forming white clouds in the air. She approached the large windows that lined the front of the restaurant, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it could be heard over the wind. She hesitated at the edge of the glass, peering inside. And the scene was almost too picturesque. Warm, golden light bathed the interior, casting a cozy glow over the patrons. Waiters moved gracefully between tables, balancing trays of champagne and delicately plated meals. Couples leaned close to each other, their laughter blending with the soft strains of a piano playing in the background. And there he was. James sat at a table near the center of the room, his back straight, his posture relaxed. He wore the navy blue blazer she had bought him for their last anniversary, paired with a crisp white shirt that accentuated his dark hair and strong features. But it wasn't his appearance that made Michelle's chest tighten. It was the woman seated across from him. She was stunning, with sleek, dark hair that fell in perfect waves over her shoulders. Her dress, a deep emerald green, hugged her figure like it had been tailored just for her. She laughed at something James said, her head tilting back slightly, and the sound carried even through the glass. Michelle's breath hitched as she watched James reach across the table and place his hand over the woman's. It was a gesture so familiar, so intimate, that it made her stomach churn. They weren't just colleagues or friends. This wasn't a business dinner. It was something far more personal. Michelle stepped back, her boots slipping slightly on the icy pavement. She fumbled for her phone, her hands trembling as she opened the camera. She didn't want to believe what she was seeing, but the lens didn't lie. She snapped several photos, James holding the woman's hand, their glasses raised in a toast, the way he leaned in closer to her than he had to Michelle in months. Her chest felt tight, like she couldn't draw a full breath. She wanted to burst into the restaurant, to confront him in front of everyone and demand answers, but something held her back. Maybe it was the fear of hearing another carefully crafted lie. Maybe it was the way her pride recoiled at the thought of causing a scene. Or maybe it was because deep down she already knew the truth, and no words from James could change it. Instead, she turned away, her vision blurring as tears mingled with the snowflakes on her cheeks. She made her way back to the car, her body trembling not from the cold, but from the weight of betrayal. The storm raged around her as she climbed into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut and gripping the wheel like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. The drive home was a blur. The storm had worsened and visibility was poor, but Michelle barely noticed. Her mind replayed the images from the restaurant over and over, each one cutting deeper than the last. The woman's laugh, James's smile, the way they toasted with champagne as if celebrating something special. By the time she pulled into the driveway, her tears had stopped, replaced by a numb, heavy ache in her chest. She sat in the car for a moment, staring at the house she had made a home for their family. It felt foreign now, like the warmth and love it once held had been hollowed out, leaving only a shell. Michelle stepped inside, the silence of the house pressing down on her like a weight. She dropped her keys on the console table and sank into the armchair by the fire. The warmth from the flames did little to thaw the cold that had settled in her bones. She opened her phone and scrolled through the photos she had taken, her hands steady now. Each image was a confirmation of what she had suspected for months. James wasn't just distracted or overworked. He was someone she no longer recognized. Would you have confronted James at the resort, or do you think Mitchell made the right call by leaving quietly? If yes, why do you think so? Michelle stared into the fire, the flickering flames casting shadows on her face. She had always thought of herself as someone who would fight for her marriage, who would do whatever it took to keep her family together. But now, sitting in the quiet of their living room, she realized that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away. Tonight she would gather her thoughts, her strength, and her resolve. Tomorrow she would decide what came next. For now she let the fire burn, knowing that her world had already been set ablaze. The house was eerily silent as Michelle stepped into the master bedroom, the weight of the evening pressing heavily on her chest. The warmth of the fire downstairs didn't reach her here. The air was cold and sterile, a perfect reflection of the emptiness she felt. The faint scent of James's cologne lingered in the room, mingling with the subtle lavender fragrance of her diffuser, a blend of their lives that now felt suffocating. She flipped on the light, her eyes sweeping across the room she had once cherished. The luxurious king-size bed with its pristine white sheets, the ornate oak dresser where James kept his cufflinks, the plush rug that muffled her footsteps, all of it seemed foreign now. This wasn't home anymore. It was just a house, filled with things that no longer held meaning. Michelle took a deep breath and opened her closet. The rows of dresses, blouses, and tailored pants stared back at her, each one a piece of the life she had meticulously built. She reached for her favorite suitcase, the sleek leather one James had given her for their 10th anniversary, and placed it on the bed. The irony of using his gift to leave him wasn't lost on her. Her hands moved with a mechanical precision as she began to pack. Jewelry first. She opened the mirrored box on her vanity, carefully selecting the pieces James had given her over the years. Sparkling necklaces, diamond-studded bracelets, earrings that glittered like stars. Each one was a reminder of the man he used to be, the man she had fallen in love with. She placed them gently into a small velvet pouch and tucked it into the suitcase. Next came the designer bags, shoes, and clothing. She chose only what mattered to her, leaving behind items that no longer felt like hers. The process was cathartic, each item she packed symbolizing a step closer to freedom. The storm outside raged on, the wind howling against the windows, but inside, Michelle moved with quiet determination. As she packed her things, she debated whether to tip off Sarah's husband, Daniel. But the image of James and Sarah laughing together at the restaurant had solidified her resolve. She picked up her phone and pulled up Daniel's contact and pressed the call button. When Daniel answered, his voice had been cautious, almost wary. "Michelle, is everything okay?" She had hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. "Daniel, I don't know how to say this, but I think you deserve to know. James and Sarah, they've been seeing each other." There had been a long silence on the other end of the line, broken only by the faint sound of his breathing. When he finally spoke, his voice was strained. "How do you know?" "I saw them," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "At the high-scale restaurant. It wasn't the first time I suspected something, but now I'm sure." Daniel had thanked her quietly, his tone laced with disbelief and pain. She hadn't expected gratitude, but she had felt a small sense of vindication. For once she wasn't the only one who knew the truth. Now, as she zipped up the suitcase, she thought about the fallout her actions would cause. Daniel was the company's COO, a man James had worked with for 3 years. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was professional. Michelle knew that her tip-off would set off a chain reaction that would ripple through every aspect of James's life, and she didn't feel an ounce of guilt. She walked to James's side of the dresser and opened the top drawer. Inside were his neatly folded ties, his favorite cufflinks, and a small box containing his wedding ring. A ring he had stopped wearing months ago, citing comfort as the reason. She picked up the box, weighing it in her hand before setting it back down. Her ring still rested on her finger, a symbol of vows that had been broken beyond repair. She slipped it off and placed it on top of the box, a final act of closure. The last step was the note. Michelle sat at the desk in the corner of the room, pulling out a piece of crisp stationery. She picked up the pen, its weight familiar in her hand, and paused for a moment, gathering her thoughts. So the words came easily, as if they had been waiting to be written. "I know everything. Good luck explaining this to your board." She folded the note and placed it on the dining table downstairs, positioning it so it would be the first thing James saw when he returned. The simplicity of the message belied the depth of her emotions, but she didn't need to spell out her pain. The photos on her phone, the packed suitcase, and the empty house would say everything she couldn't. She carried her suitcase to the front door, her boots echoing softly against the hardwood floor. The storm outside had begun to ease, the wind dying down to a whisper. Michelle stepped out onto the porch, the cold air biting at her cheeks. She didn't look back as she walked to her car, the suitcase rolling behind her. As she drove away, the weight on her chest began to lift. For the first time in months, she felt a sense of clarity. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it would be hers to navigate. She thought of the note on the table, the message she had sent to Daniel, and the choices she had made. They were bold, decisive, and unapologetic, qualities she had forgotten she possessed. Would you have gone as far as Michelle and tipped off Sarah's husband, or would you have handled it differently? The first rays of Christmas morning filtered through the frosted windows as James's car rolled into the driveway. The storm had passed, leaving the world blanketed in pristine white snow. It was a picture-perfect scene, one that should have filled him with holiday cheer. Instead, he felt a gnawing fatigue in his chest. He had spent the night tossing and turning at Sarah's place, her tearful pleas for more commitment ringing in his ears. He didn't have answers for her then, and he still didn't now. James pushed open the door to their home, the familiar creak of the hinges greeting him. The house was cold and dark, save for the faint light coming from the kitchen. He paused, glancing around the foyer. Something felt off. The smell of cinnamon and pine that usually greeted him was absent. The Christmas tree in the living room stood bare, stripped of its ornaments and lights, like a ghost of the joy it once represented. The gifts that had been carefully arranged beneath it were gone, leaving only a bare rug and a sense of emptiness. His heart skipped a beat as he called out into the silence. "Michelle, are you home?" No response. His footsteps echoed unnervingly as he made his way to the kitchen. There on the counter was a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was unmistakable, Michelle's elegant script, deliberate and unyielding. "I know everything. Good luck explaining this to your board." The words hit him like a physical blow, his breath catching in his throat. He picked up the note, his hands trembling slightly. Memories of last night rushed back with brutal clarity. Michelle's absence at home when he had left, her quiet unease over the past few weeks, the way her eyes had seemed to search for answers he never gave. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath, slamming the note onto the counter. His jaw tightened as he glanced around the kitchen, his mind racing. He strode through the house, calling her name, hoping this was some dramatic ploy for attention. But the house was empty. No Michelle, no kids. Only her silence and her absence answered him. As he paced back into the kitchen, his phone buzzed on the counter where he had dropped it. The screen flashed with a notification, an email marked urgent from the board of directors. His stomach twisted as he unlocked it, his eyes scanning the terse language. "James, it has come to our attention that there are serious allegations concerning your conduct and professional ethics. Attached, you will find a resignation letter from Daniel Jenkins, which includes extensive evidence regarding your personal behavior and its impact on the company. We will be convening an emergency meeting tomorrow to discuss next steps. Please be prepared to address these claims." James's blood ran cold as he opened the attachment. The resignation letter was written with cold precision, detailing how Daniel had discovered the affair between Sarah and James. Attached to the letter were damning screenshots, text messages, photos, and financial records that implicated James in covering up Sarah's lavish spending through company accounts. He sank into one of the kitchen chairs, his head in his hands. "This can't be happening," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. His mind raced, scrambling for a way to contain the situation. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the implications were devastating. Flashbacks hit him like a series of cruel blows. The first was of Daniel, his COO and once his closest ally, who had stood by him during the company's toughest times. James had always admired Daniel's integrity, though now he realized that same integrity would be his undoing. He could still see Daniel's face at the last board meeting, calm and focused, never hinting at the storm brewing beneath the surface. Then there was Sarah, her laughter, her charm, her insistent need for attention and affirmation. She had been a whirlwind in his life, promising an escape from the monotony of his marriage. But now all he could see was the way she had clung to him last night, her eyes wide with panic as she realized their secret wasn't so secret anymore. And finally, Michelle, Her quiet strength, her unwavering support, the sacrifices she had made for their family. He had taken her for granted, dismissing her concerns, ignoring her pain. Now, the house felt hollow without her presence, a reflection of the damage he had wrought. James's phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Sarah. He hesitated before answering, his voice curt. "What do you want?" "James," she began, her tone frantic. "Have you seen the emails? Daniel knows everything. And he's leaving the company, and the board is going to come after you. What are we going to do?" "We," James snapped, his temper flaring. "This is your mess too, Sarah. Don't act like you're some innocent victim in all of this." Her voice turned sharp, defensive. "You're the one who dragged me into this. You promised me we'd figure it out, that you'd leave Mitchell and we'd start fresh. And now my husband has left me, and I'm caught in the middle of your corporate nightmare." "Don't put this on me," he growled, slamming his fist on the counter. "You knew exactly what you were getting into." The call ended abruptly, leaving James seething. The weight of everything crashed down on him, the board's scrutiny, Daniel's betrayal, Sarah's hysteria, and Mitchell's devastating exit. By the afternoon, the media had caught wind of the scandal. Headlines began to circulate, speculating about the company's future and James's involvement in the affair. Colleagues and friends reached out with cautious texts, their carefully worded messages betraying their shock and curiosity. James stared at the chaos unfolding on his phone, his once polished image crumbling in real time. The home he had taken for granted now felt like a prison, its walls closing in on him. The emptiness of the house was deafening, each room echoing with memories of what he had lost. That evening, James stood in the living room, staring at the bare Christmas tree. The silence of the house weighed heavily on him. Mitchell's note remained on the kitchen counter, a stark reminder of her quiet yet devastating decision to leave. For the first time in years, James felt the sting of true isolation. He had built his life on charm and ambition, but now, standing alone in the house he had once shared with his family, he realized the cost of his choices. Do you think James deserved everything that happened, or was Mitchell's revenge too harsh? Let us know your thoughts. As the hours ticked by, James remained rooted in place, the weight of his actions pressing down on him. He had lost everything, his family, his reputation, and the life he had taken for granted. And for the first time, he was forced to confront the man he had become. The first signs of dawn painted the city skyline in hues of gold and pink, the light filtering through the tall windows of Ava's new apartment, Mitchell's best friend. The space was modern and sleek, a stark contrast to the sprawling suburban house she had left behind. Everything here was hers, chosen with intention and care. A plush gray sofa sat opposite a minimalist coffee table, a small but thriving fern adding a touch of green to the otherwise neutral palette. The scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, mingling with the faint hum of jazz playing softly in the background. Shell stood by the window, her hands wrapped around a warm mug. She wore a cozy cream sweater and leggings, her hair loosely pulled back. The morning sun caught the slight smile on her lips as she gazed out at the bustling streets below. For the first time in years, she felt at peace. The decision to leave hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary, a step toward reclaiming the life she had almost lost. The night before, Ava had hosted a small gathering of friends in her home. The apartment had been filled with laughter and warmth, the kind that came from people who genuinely cared for her. Her oldest friend, Ava, had clinked glasses with her and said, "Here's to new beginnings, Mitch." Mitchell had smiled, feeling the weight of Ava's words. These weren't just her friends, they were her anchors, the people who had stood by her during the storm. She had shared pieces of her story with them, carefully peeling back the layers of pain and betrayal. They hadn't judged her, they had simply listened and supported her as she began to rebuild. This Christmas morning was different from all the others she had known. There were no elaborate decorations or piles of gifts under a tree. Instead, there was a quiet contentment that came from knowing she had chosen herself for the first time in years. Her phone buzzed with a message, and she glanced at the screen. It was from her children, a photo of them at their grandparents' house, faces lit with excitement as they opened their presents. Her heart swelled with love and gratitude. She had fought hard to maintain a sense of normalcy for them, despite everything. She sipped her coffee, her thoughts drifting to the woman she had been a year ago. Back then, she had buried her own needs under layers of compromise and sacrifice, believing that holding her family together was the ultimate goal. But now, standing in her sunlit apartment, she realized that sometimes losing everything was the only way to find yourself. Michelle learned that sometimes losing everything means gaining yourself. Miles away, in the darkened shell of the house they had once shared, James sat alone. The bottle of scotch on the table was nearly empty, its contents a testament to his attempts to drown out the silence that had become deafening. He glanced at the bare Christmas tree, the scattered remnants of a life he had built and destroyed. The note Mitchell left lay on the counter, its sharp words echoing in his mind like a relentless mantra. "I know everything." He chuckled bitterly, his voice hollow. Everything. She had been stronger than he had given her credit for. Smarter. He had underestimated her resolve, and now he was left to grapple with the weight of his choices. The once proud CEO, the charming husband, the man who had everything was now just a broken figure in an empty house. So this Christmas tale serves as a reminder. Trust, once broken, can never be the same. But from the ashes of betrayal, new beginnings can emerge. For Mitchell, the betrayal had been a crucible, forging her into someone new. The pain, though searing, had taught her resilience. She thought of the life she was building now, one filled with genuine connections, moments of self-discovery, and a deep commitment to her children. She had learned that while love could be a powerful force, self-love was the foundation upon which everything else was built. As the tea warmed her hands, she allowed herself a small smile. The holidays, though bittersweet, were hers to reclaim. No longer tied to the shadows of her past, she could look to the future with hope. For James, however, the consequences of his actions were only beginning to unfold. He wasn't just facing personal loss, his professional world was unraveling as well. The board had made it clear they couldn't trust him. He would have to step down, his once pristine legacy tarnished. And Sarah, the woman he had risked everything for, had abandoned him too, blaming him for the fallout of their affair. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had chased fleeting pleasures, only to lose the things that truly mattered. And now, with the house empty and the silence pressing down on him, he had no one left to blame but himself. The contrast between their lives was stark, one moving forward with purpose, the other shackled by regret. And yet, both paths stemmed from the same moment of betrayal. It was a sobering reminder of the ripple effects of choices, of how a single act could set off a chain reaction that changed lives forever. What would you have done in Michelle's shoes? Would you have left, or would you have stayed and confronted James? And what about James? Do you think he got what he deserved, or was Michelle's revenge too harsh? Let us know what you think. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this.